front of this sedimentary formation of granite crystal stalagmites?
No. I was just wondering about that dumb rock there.
Remind me to pulverize you later.
Okay, I should write that down. What does it mean?
Boy, oh boy, when they passed out brains, you must have thought they said rain and said you would rather it not.
Oh. So, what's with the dirt clod?
This ain't no dirt clod. This is the special rock that David used to slay Goliath.
Slay who? What?
Don't you know anything? I am talking about David and Goliath, the guys who had one of the shortest fights in history.
Is it in the Guinness Book of Records?
I do not know, but it is in the Bible.
Oh, I do not remember hearing that story. Would you mind telling it to me?
Why, certainly I will tell it to you. I am known as one of the world's best storytellers.
Yeah, I heard the pastor telling your mother that.
Okay, now here is the story, which I like to call a pretty good shot. Not a bad title, huh?
Oh.
Pay attention. This Bible story is found in 1 Samuel 17, 1 through 51. One day, the children of Israel and the nasty persons of the Philistine army were having a war. Back in those days, they usually started by thinking up names to call each other. Well, the Philistines were pretty good at that, and in no time at all, they were calling the children of Israel all kinds of things. Well, the children of Israel were God's people, and so they were refraining from yelling back at the bad Philistine persons. Well, after a while, this very large, giant-type soldier named Goliath got into the act and told the children of Israel that he was the strongest Philistine in the land and that he could punch out the whole army of Israel.
Oh, that sounds like a kid Mike in my math class.
Remind me to slap you, silly.
Oh, I'll have to write that down.
As I was saying, Goliath was the strongest guy in the Philistine army.
Well, this Mike is pretty strong too. He doesn't use deodorant.
As I was saying,
Okay.
Goliath came out and started calling the children of Israel bad names. Well, about this time, the king of Israel, Saul, was getting fed up with the giant Goliath and began to look for someone in the army of Israel who could go out against him. All were afraid, as they knew Goliath could whip them with one hand. Well, it just so happened that David, a typical shepherd-type person, was just pulling into the army camp on his brand-new sheepdog. David had come to bring his brothers, who were in the army, some kosher pickles and knew nothing about the giant Goliath and the terrible Philistines. Now David, who was just a kid, heard Goliath bad-mouthing the children of Israel and went to King Saul and asked him why the giant was getting away with making fun of God and God's people. David told the king that he was put out with Goliath's attitude toward God and asked if it would be okay if he went out there and taught the giant a lesson. The king told David that he shouldn't fight the giant, but that if he really wanted to, it was okay. So, King Saul prayed for David, and when David saw Goliath, he went down to the river and selected 5 really nice, smooth stones. King Saul wondered how David was going to defeat the giant with rocks, since Goliath regularly ate rocks with his morning cereal. Undaunted, David gathered his stones and went to take out Goliath.
He should have called a SWAT team.
Do not interrupt.
I'm sorry.
As I was saying, David went out to do battle with Goliath. When David got up close, he noticed that he was about 6 feet shorter than the giant. Now Goliath was really mad. "Why have you sent out a midget to fight me?" he bellowed. David politely told him that he was not a midget, but that he was a smaller type shepherd riding a very short sheepdog. Well, to make a long story pretty much the same length, Goliath called David, the children of Israel, and God another bad name. David grabbed his slingshot and fired off a rock that caught Goliath right between the eyes. The giant fell to the ground, and David rushed over and grabbed Goliath's sword and cut off the giant's head just to make sure he would not have any ideas about getting up again. That made David a great hero. He had fought and beaten the giant, and now the whole nasty Philistine army ran off like cowards. God had saved David and the children of Israel.
Wow, that was a great story, Kenny. And you say that this is the rock that David used?
Well, perhaps not the exact one. I used a little poetic license.
Probably a lot of poetic there, but it's still a good story.